Hello again, everyone. My name is Marissa Davis. I am founder and principal of Tallawah Consulting, where we work with mission-driven brands and help them to maximize their social impact by using equity, innovation, and inclusion to drive their core strategy forward. Again, we have been having our Inclusive Capital series as part of our Tallawah Talks. And I'm so happy that for today we have Nasir Qadree, and please, Nasir, make sure I'm pronouncing this right here, um, joining us, to offer another perspective and angle on what it looks like to be leveraging capital in inclusive ways. And so before we begin, I just want to give, the audience just a little taste of who Nasir is, which certainly this is not limiting. There's far more to him than his bio will speak to, but at least it gives you a little taste. So first and foremost, Nasir, he's founder and managing partner at Zeal Capital Partners. And it's an inclusive investment vehicle partnering with entrepreneurs to bridge America's wealth and skills gaps. Within his role, he's been really focusing, he focuses the fund's efforts and leads investment activities and manages post value creation strategies and support mechanisms for portfolio companies. Prior to that, he worked with a number of companies, not the least of them being AT&T, where he was the associate director of their Aspire Social Investment Fund. And this was a $400 million fund where he oversaw direct investments in education, employment technology companies, and led their investment readiness program, as well as leverage partnerships with national accelerators across the country, and worked with at Village Capital, where he was the global head of education. And beyond that, he in 2018 was recognized by the Washington Business Journal as a 40 under 40 recipient for his work and contributions to the industry and community, and proudly holds a BA from Hampton University, uh, graduating magna cum laude. So very happy to have you here, Nasir. And yeah, thanks again for being part of this conversation.
Marissa, great. Thank you for having me. I've had this talk circled on my calendar for some time, and kudos to you for your leadership and pushing these conversations, offering a platform to share these conversations from diverse stakeholders. I think it's very important that we know each other. And again, really appreciative in joining your show. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you. So, let's get to it. The first question I have really is around understanding sort of capital here, right? That it can be leveraged in a number of different ways via philanthropy, venture capital, impact investing, and even beyond that. Where would you say you fall within this work?
Yeah, so Zeal is a venture capital fund, a traditional GP LP fund that takes equity stakes into companies.
Mm-hmm.
And within our fund, we have a investment strategy that allows us to source, invest, and help scale high growth companies to but hopefully billion-dollar enterprises. And so our North Star is to achieve alpha, but in doing so, ensuring that we are building out the best support systems that will allow those companies to scale, but also tracking impact metrics as it relates to a firm that it's not that a firm that is focusing on also impact as well, but keep maintaining our North Star to achieve alpha.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there are several pieces there that we'll be unpacking a little further later on. But there's so many people that enter this space in different ways, and especially for you, thinking about these different priorities that you're looking at simultaneously. I'm curious what inspired you to get into this work and this space in the first place?
That's a great question, Marissa. I've been, like a lot of us, been inspired and influenced by a number of mentors. And being proactive has been the number one characteristic for me. That things that we are interested in, we have to proactively lean in, ask questions, do research, and get uncomfortable. And as we decide to figure out if it's a great fit or not, what was what was clear to me is that I wanted to work in a capacity that aligned with my values, my skill set, but at the same time offered this sense of economic mobility, personal economic mobility, that I can provide for my family, but also as I thought about generational wealth. And I've been blessed to really be mentored by some of the most storied investors, storied operators, and most of which are African Americans, people who look like me. I always felt, as a lot of us, that representation matters. And that to me was very inspiring. But as we fast forward, the data of venture capitalists that looks like you and I, unfortunately, hasn't really changed at all. And so important that we're, at least myself, now that I'm in a position to explore new ways to increase diversity at the VC level, and of course, Black and brown entrepreneurs and women entrepreneurs. I'm really excited to be in that position. But early on, the unifying theme was, how do I work in mission-driven work that allows me to bring my skill set, my values, but at the same time achieve that economic mobility personally and as it relates to generational wealth.
Yeah, now, you speak to this achieving economic mobility, and one of the important factors that got you into this space and prioritizing the goals or values that you had mentioned up top in the first place. But I'm curious, like how has that shaped then how Zeal Capital functions?
There's a direct correlation around the crux of Zeal, our investment strategy, our unifying themes, and how I grew up. I'm the oldest. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, born and raised, the oldest of three siblings. I grew up in a young, low to middle class upbringing. I wasn't the wisest kid. I would get in trouble often, but I did go through five nonprofits that really shaped my thinking, and also recognizing what career interests or trajectories I could have an interest in. And then navigating college as an HBCU graduate. You mentioned Hampton University, as of today, the best 4 consecutive years of my life. And also then learning during my time on Wall Street, the different areas that I can potentially work, whether it be trading, which I started, investment banking, asset management, and then I started learning about the private markets after opening up a coffee shop in New York City. And so when I think about my upbringing, and particularly growing up in predominantly Black community, and I continue to, and now I'm in a capacity where, the lifeblood of small businesses is venture capital, or just capital in general, and recognizing the many underrepresented and women-led entrepreneurs who are not getting a fair swing at the plate at capital. That's heartthrobbing for me. I feel a necessity to say, hey, look, there's actually a market opportunity when we're leaving capital on the table when we don't proactively invest in women, people of color. But also, it's great for business. It's great for our economy. And early on in my career, I was essentially making white people rich richer every single day. And I felt A, uncomfortable, B, feeling disconnected. And so this leadership role gives me the opportunity to explore new ways to level the playing field. So we're truly casting the breadth of innovation across our country, not just coming from very few places, back in the same people.
Right. No, and I, know that one of the things that you were mentioning, actually, pause for 1 second. I'm hearing a bit of feedback. Let me just. All right. Yeah. So you were saying that, you know, what you do, even just your focus and values is woven into how Zeal Capital functions, right? And part of that is um, thinking about economic mobility, but how it relates to entrepreneurs of color. So one of the things I know and hear that, is a big part of what you all do is this thing called inclusive investing, right? And that seems to me like it has a particular meaning for you all. So what does that exactly look like, especially when there's so many other companies and so many other VC firms now that are now trying to focus their dollars and efforts on communities of color and entrepreneurs of color?
Yeah, that's a great question. We think about it to the extent that when you lead with inclusion, when you expand your dinner tables,
Mm-hmm.
it's a proactive approach. And I'm not saying that those that are choosing to solely focusing on people of color and women is the incorrect thing to do. But if we truly want to engage the breadth of capital across our country, across our globe for that matter,
Mm-hmm.
it requires an investment discipline. And so today, inclusive investing, which by the way is trademarked by us,
Mm-hmm.
so it's an investment discipline that allows us to widen our lens and best positions our companies to outperform. More specifically, it's also a five-pronged market-back approach that allows us to widen our lens and best position our companies to outperform. And if we're invested in those companies, our fund will in turn outperform. So number one, we ourselves are diverse fund managers. 70 trillion in management, less than 70 trillion under management, only 1.3% looks like you and I.
Mm-hmm.
That's travesty. So when you start from the top down and your team is diverse, diversity of ethnicity, diversity of gender, and operating experience, domain experience, background, skill set, you will organically outperform, data says, but you will also organically, bucket number two, over-index your allocation in backing more than what the data has said over the past 20 plus years,
Mm-hmm.
more underrepresented, particularly Black and Latinx entrepreneurs and women. And so that's bucket number two. Bucket number three is that when we proactively earmark our traveling dollars, we lean into these secondary markets, so geographic inclusivity. We will also have a more diverse pipeline of entrepreneurs. Today, 80% of capital in the US goes to three places, just south of 80%. California, Boston, and New York.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing wrong with those three cities, but if entrepreneurs are truly going to be the change agents of our country, then it has to include everyone, not just a very few headquartered in the same places, backing the same people who look the same, who also, in many cases, are graduates from the same Ivy League schools and maybe a few universities like MIT and
Right.
and Duke or Stanford. Again, nothing wrong with that, but innovation's everywhere, not just coming from very few places. So we are proactively earmarking our traveling dollars and saying, hey, look, there's great companies headquartered in Dallas, Texas, great companies headquartered in Cincinnati, Ohio. There's great companies headquartered here in Washington, DC, and in New York, and in Silicon Valley. And so our relationships, our proactive approach allows us to have this geographic inclusivity lens for bucket number three. Bucket number 4 is our currency, right? Our currency meaning our sector focus, and other funds, it can be that you're a generalist. But these are these are the areas in which you're proactively investing in. And we believe there's a correlation between the future of work and fintech.
Yeah.
The fifth bucket is, last but not least, is impact. How do we include impact by way of measuring impact throughout the life cycle of the portfolio companies term within our venture firm? And so that's this 5-pronged market back approach again allows us to widen our lens and explore investing in companies, but also best position these companies to outperform.
Yeah, and just as you're kind of going through this 5-pronged approach, I'm thinking about a number of other companies, just VC firms that are now saying that they want to focus on Black and Brown entrepreneurs. How would you say what you're doing is different, or the kind of the unique nature of this particular 5-pronged approach that's different from what other VC firms out there that are now wanting to focus their dollars on these individuals?
Well, I'd say, Marissa, that inclusive investing is an investment discipline,
Mm-hmm.
and it allows us to ensure that we're not solely focusing on women and people of color,
Mm-hmm.
but we're also pushing even quote unquote blue chip VC firms like the Andreessens, like the Excels, to say, hey, look, if you truly care about increasing your diversity across your portfolio, taking this inclusive investing approach, which will cause you to recognize the diversity of your own team first, that's important. And so it's an investment discipline that allows us to really cast a wider net across the country, across the globe for that matter. Number 2, we're also a sector-specific fund. So the goal here was to stay within our competency, do this well, and then consider scaling. Now, I think it's important that when we talk about generational wealth, and you find that a lot of the fund managers who are solely focusing on women or people of color, they're generalists. And so we have a huge competitive advantage given our operating domain and investment acumen across the fintech and future of work sector. That's another core differentiator. The third core differentiator is that we have partnered with 24 entrepreneur support organizations across the country, all of which are outside of Silicon Valley, New York, and Boston. Mm-hmm. I don't know of one investment firm that has partnered with a accelerator program, or 24 of which, and many partner with accelerator programs, but not 24.
Right.
So these are deep relationships that allows us to have early access to deals that are headquartered in these quote unquote flyover cities. Mm-hmm. The fourth bucket is this. I mentioned this is market back, and so when building out the infrastructure of Zeal, it was important for me to include R&D, the role that R&D plays in shaping our investment thesis. And so Brookings Institution is a partner of ours that allows us to push our thinking as it relates to policy implications or regulatory constraints that could potentially prevent these companies from scaling. On the impact side, a number of white papers led by Andre Perry on our advisory board, who has done incredible work around income inequality, the wage gap, the skills gap between education and employment. That is a core differentiator for us because, again, it shapes our thinking in terms of how do we, what do we need to know about in terms of the end user, particularly in these low wealth communities, the underbanked consumer. And so those are four buckets that I'd say are core, very much differentiated. I think the last thing is that most of these fund managers are actually headquartered on the coast. They're headquartered in New York. They're headquartered in California. So there can be a sense of bias in terms of where they choose to source their companies. Being in Washington, D.C., which I'm a big fan of, gives us a competitive advantage just given we're in a non-traditional market.
Gotcha. So, I am hearing there is one looking at non-traditional, are operating within non-traditional markets, and also this kind of research-driven approach that is also rooted in sort of the fundamentals of understanding, I think, systemic economic mobility. That is all making me think about the question of impact, right? You had mentioned earlier that it this first of all, this is VC firm is ensuring that the number of um, projects and companies that you invest in are profitable and performing well. But what does impact look like uh, when you go about the work of making these investments?
So it varies on a case by case basis. So when you become a Zeal portfolio company, you sign a diversity pledge,
Mm.
first and foremost, to ensure that your team either A, remains diverse, or your team will actively recruit a more diverse team. So it's potential or current, by the way. So we're not excluding companies who are not diverse. In fact, if they're not diverse, that's our value add. We have Rachel Williams, who was former head of D&I at StubHub, and Yelp, who now today is head of D&I at Moonshot X, which is a Google subsidiary. Mm-hmm. So we bring strong operating exposure to our portfolio companies as it relates to potential or current as we think about a diverse management team, right? Number two is, depending on the business model, or capturing metrics, obviously diverse management team, but also if it's a company that's focusing on increasing FICO scores or credit scores, like based on this tool, how much on average does a consumer's credit score increase that better positions that consumer to be qualified for that loan, or to see the light of owning their own home one day. Yeah. Of course, there's the retention and promotion. For example, a company called Canaries we recently invested in, that is a people analytics platform that focuses on recruiting and engagement and promotion at the employer level. And so it depends on the business model. I think the last thing is the global sustainable development goals. So mm-hmm. We are tackling 7 out of the 19 global sustainable SDG goals. It's a bit of a tongue twister, and that's another indicator that we're capturing as well. And so it's evolving. The great news is that we're proud to be members of the Impact Managers, Impact Capital Managers, which is a group of fund managers who seek both financial and financial return and impact returns. And so we exchange notes on how best to capture impact. So it's been great to be part of that community.
No, that's great, and it's great that you all can be leaders in that space, especially as right now there are a number of companies that are trying to figure out, how to prioritize inclusion in a meaningful way. And so I guess my last question here, just as you've been speaking, inclusion isn't the afterthought, it is literally woven into the design and the discipline that you mentioned as kind of being a core part of Zeal Capital. So just for those who are saying, this is just a lot of work, it's actually hard to find these kinds of companies, or hard to prioritize these, perhaps even just your 5-pronged approach. What do you say to those individuals, those companies? What is the overall opportunity or opportunities that you're seeing in the approach that you're taking?
Well, for those who, it's potential or current. We're not going to discount a company if they are in New York and they're a diverse management team. We're not going to discount a company that's an all-white team that's in San Francisco, but at the same time, rethinking how we think about credit access or new financial management tools. It's important that we outperform, our fund outperforms again. So I never want to discount or be incredibly niche, but doing it in a way that if there is a challenge around whether it be, the blind spot of a Silicon Valley company and not recognizing how that product can be used in a second tier, fourth tier market, then that's our value add. The truth is, Marissa, we're only as great, the fund is only as great as our companies. And so the second, when the fund outperforms, when we make great investments coming off this inclusive investment strategy, then I believe there will be a great deal of attention, and just because we will be marketing, even harder in terms of like saying, look, this is how we source, invested, and help scale these billion-dollar enterprises. So I'm bullish. I'm optimistic. I have hope that this is, and have extreme conviction that this new investment discipline will position us to invest in great companies.
I think it takes that kind of that fire and focus to be able to continue in this space, right? So I think this is a good place to land. I really appreciate the time that you've taken us here. And for anyone that is wanting to learn more about the work that you're doing, or just how to continue to follow you, what can they do? Where should they go?
Sure. So I'm an obsessive when it comes to email, and I'm very responsive. So feel free to email me, Nasir at zealvc.co. You can follow me on all social platforms, and Zeal VC on all social platforms as well.
Perfect. No, well, thank you so much for your time, Nasir. Thank you for the work that you're doing, and looking forward to seeing how much more successful this is over the coming months and years.
Bless you so much, Marissa. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.